appreciate you taking your time off to join us in this meaningful dialogue session with Emeritus Prof. Dr. Shad Saleem Faruqi. So before we start the session, let me introduce the speaker for the day. Emeritus Professor Dr. Shad Saleem Faruqi is a leading Malaysian expert in constitutional law, human rights, and legal theory. He is currently the holder of the Tunku Abdul Rahman Chair in University Malaya. He is also the author of over 10 books and 300 articles on these topics, and his work has been translated into Malay language. He is also a frequent speaker at international conferences and seminars. And he is also a strong advocate of law reform in many areas and has written extensively about restoring the institutional efficacy of Parliament. So basically, he is very critical of the general lack of judicial assertiveness in the cause of constitutional supremacy, but notes that winds of change are blowing to the courts and the constitution is moving from the peripheries to the center. So now I shall pass the floor to our head of Secretariat of APPGMSEJ, Prof. Dr. Denison, to deliver his 2 cents of thoughts about our speaker and the session for the day.
Welcome to this session. We said that while we are activists and doing work, and that we are researchers on constituency work, we must be reflective in our practice, our thinking. Now, recently somebody questioned, I don't go into names and all that, questioned, is Malaysia multiracial, is the constitution having it, and so forth. And then I read a very interesting article from Prof. And I remember his thick book on the Constitution, but he gave me a copy of a smaller version, a smaller version of our Constitution in this context. And I also picked up this book on multiculturalism and nation building, some things you might want to borrow and read up. So basically, we in the APPGM Secretariat team are building inclusive communities on the ground. So whether it is Malay, Chinese, Indian, we have not tried to say only Indians must go to Indian area, Chinese must go to Chinese area, Malays must go to Malay areas. Many of us have enjoyed the great hospitality di mana in Kelantan, right? And many of us who go to Kelantan have a major problem, not Anthony, but people like me, because all the makan is manis, really manis, from the curry to so forth. But we also found out, like in Pontian, people telling they are Banja, they are Java, they are Bugis. And that was something quite surprising. Or when we went to Kuala Selangor, they were saying they were Java and so forth. So I think it's important for us to look at this foundations from the Constitution on building this community and then being active promoters of the Constitution. So Malaysia, an inclusive society, society rich in diversity, built on the foundations of the federal constitution. So can the constitution be replaced? What are the features of the constitution? Are we protected? Are the Malays protected? Will the constitution disappear overnight? All the myths and so forth. So constitutional literacy is lacking. So in our team, you're going to get a crash course from Prof. I know Prof did encourage me to organize introduction to 101 on the federal constitution. Maybe my SDG Academy can introduce the course so that people become familiar, they understand the constitution, and they would apply it to their lives and defend it in that way. So Prof doesn't need any introduction. Just now we got the background and so forth, but he has always come out consistent, systematically. He has thought well, he has written well, he has spoken well. But sometimes people are ignoring all these things and interpreting their constitution in their own way. So some of us are lawyer bureau in the room, and we try to act like lawyers, but let us give a hand to Prof, who is devoting this time with us here to share. Prof, this is all full-time staff of the team. Some are young, some are old, and we are and also people online. Online we have from Ipoh, we have with Sabah, Sarawak, one or two from the NGOs. Ghana is also there. So a few online as well. Okay, so they'll be able to see that. So we have given a hand. So now it's important. After this talk, there's going to be a quiz. Okay, so if you don't want the quiz, please, three of you stand up and ask some difficult questions to the Prof. Then no quiz. If no one, then we will administer the quiz. Okay. Thank you, Prof.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Good evening. May the blessings of God be with you all. Ni hao, wanakam, sat sri akal. For all the Sabah participants, Kobi Wasian, apa khabar kita? It's my pleasure to be with you all. And at the same time, I wish to say this to you. I'm greatly humbled by this invitation because this topic is quite huge, quite complex. There are many, many dimensions. I'm going to speak to you about our constitutional scheme, the scheme of our Perlembagaan Persekutuan in 1957, and then in 1963, when Malaya was restructured into Malaysia. I'm going to talk to you about the dream of the forefathers of our nation, about what they wanted this land to be. Some of you may say, so what, that was 66 years ago. Let's look at the reality today. But I wish to say this to you, if we have to change things for the better, then we need to anchor our reforms, our demands, our hopes in something higher, in something nobler than simply our subjective opinions. I think we all need a pole star, a guide to give us direction. And so I wish to brief you on some of our constitution's ideals and values that many of us never learned about because the system of education is such that constitutional literacy is very, very weak. So that's what I intend to do today. As Prof Dato pointed out, it will be a 0-1 course on the constitutional basis of national unity, inclusiveness, unity in diversity, rather than unity in uniformity. Let me begin by saying that, okay. How do I do that? Yeah. Our nation is going through some turbulent areas of race and religious relations, and in the peninsula's partnership with Sabah and Sarawak. I wish to say this to you that it was not always like this. Till the 90s, Malaysia was an exemplar for Asia and Africa on successful intercommunal living. Sadly, we have regressed. However, it is not too late. It is never too late to repair the bridges of intercommunal friendship, to tear down the walls of separation and suspicion, and to revive the spirit of accommodation of 1957. and 1963. I wish to say this to you, that actually at the individual level, there's a great deal of friendship and brotherhood and sisterhood between all the communities at the individual level. But at the group level, we cannot deny that there are lots of tensions, partly generated who want to use race and religion basically to secure votes, to frighten people that someone here is going to destroy you and I'm here to save you. I wish to share with you my understanding of the original scheme of things in our constitution. Yes. I wish to share with you my understanding of the original scheme of things in our Perlembagan, and to invite you all to return to our winning ways. I believe that in 1957, the forefathers of our nation, especially Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra Al-Hajj, Tun Ismail, Tun Tan Siu Sin, Tun Sambanthan, sought admirably to create unity and harmony in our nation of dazzling diversity. Their vision of a shared destiny. Oops. Their vision of a shared destiny was beautifully captured in the glittering generalities of our constitution. I call our Perlembagan our document of destiny. That was the title of my bigger book. Prof, I was not holding it back from you. The book is out of print.
No, I have a copy.
Oh, you have a copy.
It's a bit tebal. I didn't. So I brought the thinner version. That is a good.
I won't ask you whether you were violating the Copyright Act. I won't ask you. It's okay.
I got a printed. I bought a printed copy that
wonderful,
time.
Wonderful. Okay.
And I've read most
now,
parts.
Let's have a look at the constitutional design. The humble purpose of this presentation is to examine the constitutional design in our multicultural, plural, and divided society. I wish to submit that with all its flaws, and every constitution has flaws or weaknesses, the Constitution of Malaya and Malaysia was a masterpiece of moderation, compassion, compromise, and accommodation. Sadly, there is lack of constitutional literacy, and may I say, even lesser constitutional patriotism. In other words, respect for the Perlembagan. There is no knowledge and there is no respect for the Perlembagan, especially of the Constitution's provisions on ethnic relations, which are not well understood at all. The Malaysian Constitution and multiculturalism. Where does Malaysia stand on the rights of minorities? It is submitted that despite many weaknesses and imperfections, our Constitution sought to provide a workable arrangement for the people of our multi-hued nation to live together in peace and harmony and prosperity. Indigenous features. I'm not very good at operating this.
You want us to help you?
Eh?
You want us to?
Yeah, if you could help.
Yeah, so
thank you so much. Thanks.
So as you move.
Next time, just give a hand.
Yeah, okay. Indigenous features. Now, the drafting of the Merdeka Constitution was in the backdrop of many historical, economic, and cultural facts. Amongst them were this, that before the arrival of the British, Malaya was overwhelmingly populated by the Malays. Monarchies existed in various forms in early Malay history. For centuries, Islam was the identifying feature of the Malay personality. The struggle for independence was initiated and waged largely by Malay organizations, but with the cooperation of non-Malay counterparts. It was also well documented in 1957, and perhaps even today, that poverty and underdevelopment amongst the Malays were very pronounced. For example, when the Faculty of Law existed in the University of Singapore, out of 100 students, there were 10 Malays in the law faculty. So there was this problem of poverty and underdevelopment within the Malay community. Due to discriminatory colonial policies on education, economic development, and import of labor, they developed an undesirable identification of race with function. And I think that's what the British did, not only in Malaya, in many other countries. The Merdeka Constitution, therefore, next slide. The Merdeka Constitution, therefore, incorporated a number of what we call autochthonous or indigenous features which were quite indigenous to the Malay archipelago. Amongst them were the Sultanate, Islam as the religion of the Federation. Now, I just want to mention to you, the Reid Commission that drafted the Perlembagaan did not want to put Islam in the Perlembagaan Persekutuan. And please don't be offended. The Malay Sultans did not want to put Islam in the federal constitution because they felt that would undermine their power at the state level. They felt that if Islam became a federal matter, then their power over Islam would be reduced. But Tunku Abdul Rahman and UMNO insisted, and they were supported by the Pakistani delegate to the Reid Commission, Justice Hamid, who was a Pakistani judge, who said there are about 25 countries in the world which have a state religion. Why can't Malaya have a state religion? So Article 3, Clause 1 was put in that Islam is the religion of the Federation, but all other religions may be practiced in peace and harmony. And by the way, it doesn't name the other religions. In some countries, the other religions are named. The disadvantage of that is that the list then prescribes a number of religions, and those are the only religions permitted. In Malaya, there is no list. Islam is the religion of the Federation. All other religions may be practiced in peace and harmony. However, please bear this in mind, that though Article 3, Clause 1 says Islam is the religion of the Federation, Article 3, Clause 4 says nothing in this article derogates from any other provision of the Constitution. So though Islam is the religion of the Federation, no other article, no other institution, no other right or duty or procedure is rejected because of Islam. So for example, the Malay rulers and their position, it's not affected by Article 3, Clause 1, because Article 3, Clause 4 says nothing in this article derogates from any other provision of the Constitution. Next one, next slide, Sharia laws. Schedule 9 provides for the existence of Sharia laws and Sharia courts to deal with matters of Islam. However, this may surprise some of you, it is not true that the whole of Sharia applies to Muslims. No. Only 26 areas of Islam are mentioned in Jadwal 9, Schedule 1, List 2, Paragraph 1. 26 areas, mostly a Muslim family law, but also Waqaf and things of that sort, but mostly Muslim family law. So may I just give an example? Hajj. What could be more Islamic than the Hajj? It's not in the hands of the state authorities. It's not in the hands of the Sharia court. So if I have to sue Tabong Haji, I have to go to the civil courts because Hajj is in the federal list. It's the power. If I sue you, let us say in tort, law of damages, both are Muslims. I cannot go to the Sharia courts. I have to go to the civil courts because matters of tort or civil wrongs are in federal hands. Almost the entire area of crime is in federal hands. Recently, we had a case, Iki Putra Mubarak, where actually 2 Muslims were prosecuted for attempting homosexuality. And they were prosecuted by the Sharia authorities. They did not deny the facts against them, but they said, you have no authority to prosecute me. Why? Because homosexuality is in the penal code, section 297A, I think, which means it must go to the civil courts. Sharia courts have no power over homosexuality, which is clearly a sin in Islam, of course, but Sharia authorities have no power. And they won the case. The court said whether it is murder, whether it is rape, whether it is theft or robbery or homosexuality or other crimes, the penal code is such a thick statute. Crimes are a federal matter. So I just want to clarify this to you. Many people, including some lawyers, with all due respect, and some lawyers, they say Sharia is in state hands. That's an exaggeration. 26 topics of the Sharia are in state hands. The rest are in federal hands. And I sue you in contract. It goes to the civil courts, even though both of us are Muslims. And there is Islamic law of contract. There is Islamic law of civil wrong. There is Islamic criminal law. It doesn't go to the Sharia courts. So Schedule 9 provides for the existence of Sharia courts, and Sharia courts will deal with matters of Islam, but only in 26 areas. I just want to mention this to you. Almost every Sharia enactment in the 13 states ignores this limitation. They pass laws on matters which are actually in federal hands. And they get away with it because Muslims are reluctant to challenge. If a Muslim challenges, they say, you're not a good Muslim. If a non-Muslim challenges, they'll say, hey, you don't campur tangan with matters of Islam. So they get away with it. I'm just giving 1 or 2 examples. For example, they say before Muslim couples get married, you must go for an HIV test. I think that's a very good thing to do, protection of both. But the problem is this, health, infectious diseases are a federal matter. There should be a federal law requiring not just Muslims, but everybody to go for an HIV test. States have no authority over infectious diseases. That is a federal matter. We are a federal country, federal parliament and state assembly. The states, many of the states don't comply with the limits. Once in a while, they are challenged and they lose the case, but only once in a while. Most of the time, they get away with it. Then Malay special position. The historical tradition of the special position of the Malays and the natives of Sabah Sarawak in 63 was continued in Article 153. Please do remember that even during the British days, there was provisions for Malay special position. The Perlembagan continued with that. The Reid Commission's recommendation was that Malay special position should be for 15 years only after Merdeka. But UMNO objected to that. There is no time limit for Article 153 special position. Malay reserves are recognized by Article 89. Bahasa Melayu in Rumi was entrenched as the official language for all official purposes but with the freedom to other communities to preserve their languages and to use them for non-official purposes. Later on, I'll point out to you, if time permits, actually the National Education Act has a beautiful provision. If 15 kids in a school ask for a language to be taught, let's say 15 kids want Tamil to be taught, or Urdu, that's my mother tongue, Urdu to be taught, the school must try to find a teacher. 15 kids. Now that's a beautiful provision. So even though Malay is the national language, there is no attempt to destroy the languages of other communities. Customary laws, special protection for the customary laws of the Malays, and since 1963, native laws in Sabah Sarawak. Actually, customary laws of all communities were at one time practiced. Chinese marriages were according to Chinese customs, and Hindu marriages according to Hindu customs. But then Parliament passed a law in 1976, and under that law, non-Malay, non-Muslim customary marriage traditions were mostly taken away, and they were taken over by now a non-Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act. But that was done with the consent of the communities themselves. Okay, then may I go to the next slide? There is rural weightage during elections. And I'm not criticizing that. Rural areas everywhere in the world tend to be large in territory, small in population. I, for example, once traveled from New Haven, Connecticut to Canada by train. I could not believe, as far as you can see, there is nothing but fields and fields and fields. No houses, maybe few roads, but there were hundreds and square miles actually of territory under plantation. So population is small, area is large, and therefore it is justifiable to give the rural areas a smaller number of voters in the rural community. Article, that is rural weightage during elections. State posts, the historical reservation of some top posts in the state executive for Malays was continued, but with power to the Malay ruler to provide an exception. So in the states, the Mantri Basar, in the 9 Malay states, not the other 4, in the 9 Malay states, the Mantri Basar, the state financial officer must be a Malay unless the Sultan allows. Preaching of religion to Muslims, as this is an issue with public order implications, legal restraints are permitted on the preaching of any faith to Muslims. Please believe me, in many other countries where missionaries go to preach their religion to others, there are often racial riots, religious riots. In India, it happened in one case where missionaries, I won't mention from which religion, went to a village of low caste Hindus and asked them to convert. And they converted, the whole village converted. Normally in traditional societies, if the leaders convert, everybody else converts. So they all converted. Very next day, actually, some of the Brahmins organized an attack on the village. Scores of people were killed. And actually in India, there are laws against conversion. If there is a conversion, there must be a cooling off period whereby the government will determine whether the conversion was under free will or whether it was under inducement. So conversion is definitely a sensitive issue, and Article 11, Clause 4 says that preaching to Muslims by anyone can be regulated by the state. May I also point out to you, it's not only that non-Muslims cannot preach to Muslims, Muslims cannot preach to Muslims. I cannot preach to you. By the way, I'm a Hanafi Muslim, and most of you are Shafi. My wife is a Shafi Muslim. So we have small disagreements now and then. Sometimes she will do her wudu, and someone comes at the gate. I say, "Tengok siapa datang." She say, "Allah, janganlah, my wudu batal." I said, "No, no, no, no. Shafi wudu batal, Hanafi wudu ta batal." Hanafi rule is a little bit more lenient on this issue. So we have disagreements on some of these issues. But actually, the law is very strict. Nobody can preach to Muslims unless you have a ta'uliyah, unless you're authorized. So I have a real dilemma, Prof. When I talk jurisprudence, or for that matter, constitutional law, I don't have a ta'uliyah. So I have to look, is someone listening or not? So is the door closed or not? Otherwise, I could get into trouble. Dato Asri, Mufti of Perlis, but at that time he was not Mufti. His term had come to an end. Came to Selangor at an Usra, and he gave a talk. After the talk, he was arrested and charged for speaking without a ta'uliyah from the Selangor authorities. Here is a man with a PhD. He was associate professor at USM. He was associate professor at USM, and he has studied abroad, and he was charged with speaking without a ta'uliyah. So the law is very strict. I don't support it, but it's there. The law is there. Okay, next slide, please. Now, these were the indigenous features. I just want to point out to you, the Constitution also provided a lot of protection for non-Malays. The Malay Muslim features, may I call them the ethnic features, in the Constitution are balanced by other provisions suitable for a multiracial, multi-religious society. The Constitution is replete, is full of safeguards for the interest of other communities. Citizenship. Citizenship rights are granted to all persons, irrespective of race or religion or gender or which state you come from. Many years ago, Prof, I went to draft the Constitution of the Republic of Maldives. It clearly says, to be a citizen of Maldives, you must be a Muslim. So I told Attorney General there, I said, in Malaysia, it's not like that. Citizenship, at the stroke of midnight on Merdeka Day, August 31, 57, 1.2 million non-Malays became citizens because the citizenship provisions at that time were very generous. Jus soli was allowed. Jus soli is birth in the country. As long as they were born there, you're a citizen. But jus soli was restricted in 1962. Okay, electoral process. Next slide, please. Electoral process. When it comes to elections, right to vote or right to get elected, there is no racial, religious requirement. Anyone can. In many countries, actually, the law is such that there are religious and other requirements. In the USA, they were a little bit clever. They wanted to disenfranchise the blacks. But that would be unconstitutional. So what they did was they imposed an educational requirement. And because most of the blacks were relatively uneducated, most of them would fail the test, would have no right to vote. So in many countries, this happens, that election time, there is discrimination. But fortunately, in this country, there is none on the issue of right to vote or right to contest. Fundamental rights, Articles 5 to 13. Article 5 is personal liberty. Article 6 is abolition of slavery. But by way of a joke, but in the house, of course, there is slavery. But I don't know who is the slave. I don't know who's the slave. Women's groups often complain that being a homemaker, a housewife, there is no salary, there is no EPF, there is no SOXO. And of course, men also complain that, well, they have many complaints. So, slavery is forbidden by Article 6. I'm sorry to say, slavery is alive, but in indirect form. immigrants, especially illegal immigrants. Slavery is alive and well. Then when it comes to Article 7 has two rights. Criminal law, creating a new offense or increasing the penalty of an offense cannot be backdated. So if it becomes an offense, let us say polygamy becomes an offense for Muslims, and it can be under Article 11, Clause 5, morality, and they have not done it, but they can do it actually if they want. If polygamy becomes an offense, it cannot be backdated. So if someone has 2, 3, 4 wives, that cannot be disturbed. Now, I'm not supporting polygamy. I think one wife is enough. Not just one wife, one mother-in-law, one father-in-law, one brother-in-law. Marriage is a package deal, package deal. You don't just get a spouse, you get a whole family. So I'm not supporting polygamy. What I'm saying is, if it were criminalized, it cannot be backdated. Criminal law cannot be backdated. And then there is a beautiful provision. If someone has been prosecuted once, he cannot be prosecuted again and again for the same offense. Article 7, Clause 2. Article 8 is equality. And by the way, in 2001, the article was amended to ban gender inequality. So that was in 57, there was no ban on gender equality, but I think in the turn of the century, the Perlembagan was improved, and I salute that provision that now there is no gender inequality, except in some areas which we are challenging. Actually, citizenship matters, there is gender inequality. We are challenging that through many NGOs. Then next slide. Article 8 was equality. Article 9 is freedom of movement. Article 10 is speech, assembly, association. Article 12 is rights and respect of education. Article 13 is right to property. And in most of these articles, except the right to equality and freedom of religion, there is no discrimination on grounds of religion. So right to property, etc., there's no discrimination on grounds of religion. Okay, then federal posts at the federal level, membership of the judiciary, the civil service, the commissions under the Perlembagaan, they are open to all. Many people say, oh, the Prime Minister must be a Malay. That's not what the Constitution says. I know it will always be a Malay or a Bumiputra from Sabah Sarawak because of your numbers. But the Perlembagaan doesn't say that. Look at what happened in the USA. A colored person became the president. Obama in a predominantly white country. It may happen here. I think the beginning may be with a Sabah Sarawakian as a prime minister, but there is no requirement that pardon me?
The British Prime Minister.
Yeah. In fact, Prof, they say not only the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of Exchequer, the Mayor of London, they say Indians have taken over.
Reverse colonization. Reverse colonization.
Reverse, yes.
Reverse.
Yeah. And the medical service there is basically run by Indian doctors, actually Indian Pakistani doctors. Okay, so education is free at the primary and secondary level and is open to all, irrespective of race or religion. But I'm sad to report that because of some educational policies whereby primary, secondary education has acquired too much of a religious content, that's why many people are not sending their kids to national schools. I sent my daughter to Kuen Cheng. You will be surprised to hear that. I sent my daughter to Kuen Cheng. Then when she grew up and she got married, she had 2 children, she sent both of them to Kuen Cheng. So they speak Malay beautifully, they speak English, and they speak Mandarin. And I'm very proud of that. And I think this is something that should be emulated other Malay parents. I think we should make sure our children are not just bilingual, but trilingual. By the way, in some countries, it is a trilingual policy. national language, plus English, because it's the international language, plus your vernacular language. And I think we should, more of us should do that for the sake of our children. There's nothing anti-national about children, and children pick up so fast. Okay, and next one, financial assistance for education. Government education scholarships and loans are given to many non-Malays, though I know there is some discontent here. Protection during an emergency, even during darurat. Rights like citizenship, language, religion cannot be violated even during darurat. So what Idi Amin did in Uganda or Jomo Kenyatta did in Kenya cannot be done here. What he did was, he said, Indians, get out, go back to India or go wherever you want. And I think they were given a few months, whereby a few weeks whereby they had to leave. Even during a darurat, you cannot do it like this. You cannot just expel people. You can amend the constitution, no doubt, but to amend the citizenship chapter, you need the consent of the Majlis Raja Raja. Because the Majlis Raja Raja will try to supply a break if there is any such action. Sabah Sarawak has special rights, and rightly so. Sabah Sarawak contribute 60% of our territory, actually. Sarawak itself is almost as big as the whole of Malaya. Together, Sabah Sarawak 60%, and the minerals and the petrol and the forests and the potential hydroelectricity, I think they deserve a special position. And not only Sabah Sarawak, in India, Kashmir used to have special position. In Canada, Quebec has special position. In many other federal systems, regions have special position. Then, of course, next slide, please. Constitutional supremacy. Article 4, Clause 1 says that this constitution is the supreme law of the federation. And any law passed after Merdeka Day, which is inconsistent with this constitution, shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. So you can be a state assembly, but if you punish homosexuality, which is a federal offense, someone will take you to the court and say you are violating federal state division of power. So constitution is supreme. Religious freedom. The Sharia does not apply to non-Muslims. All religious communities are allowed to profess and practice their faiths in peace and harmony. State support by way of funds and grant of land is often given to other religions. Missionaries and foreign priests are allowed entry into the country. You'll be surprised to know that at one time, perhaps it is still the law, foreign missionaries were not retiring at age 55, which was the retirement age for the rest of us. They were retiring much later. My daughters went to Asunta Primary and Secondary. Sister Enda retired at 65. I don't know if any of you know Sister Enda. I'm not complaining about that. What I'm saying is there was special provision actually for the missionaries. They were allowed to work because they built the schools from their own funds with love, and so they were given some special treatment. Now recently, next slide please, in the Indira Gandhi case, the federal court made a number of rulings that have very significant and positive impact on the rights of minorities in this country. Now, what was happening was this, that in many families, Hindu families, I don't know, there are cases in Christian families, but I know the cases that went were all sadly Hindu families. One of the spouses converts to Islam, goes to the Sharia courts and says, I have taken the Shahada, I'm a Muslim, I can't be married to a non-Muslim. And the Sharia court then dissolves the marriage. So the Sharia court dissolves the marriage. the Sharia court gives custody and guardianship of the children to the mu'allaf, to the convert. The Sharia court also converts the Muslims to Islam. Now, many of these cases were going to the courts, and the high courts were basically saying, this is not a matter they can handle, this is a matter for the Sharia courts. But in 2018, in the case of Indira Gandhi, Justice Zainon Ali and her brother and sister judges, of course, the majority of the court was Malay and Muslim. The court decided that if you convert an infant, the consent of both parents must be obtained. The court also said that when it comes to the issue of the religion of the child will decide when the child comes of age. The court also said, and this is very controversial, many Malays and Muslims are very angry with it. I personally believe it's the right decision. The court said a Sharia court has no power to dissolve the marriage of a non-Muslim. It doesn't make sense. If one party is a Muslim, the other is a non-Muslim, and the Sharia court is dissolving that marriage, both parties must be subject to the jurisdiction of the law. So the decision of Zainon Ali, God bless her, was an extremely important decision. I know that many Malays, many Muslims are unhappy with it. I want to say this to you, that is the federal court decision. Next slide, please. Vernacular languages are allowed, and you may be surprised. Let me just quote to you. The reason I want to show you the Perlembagan is because my credibility is generally quite low. Many people don't believe me. So I carry this with me. Perlembagan Persekutuan. I say, please let me read to you from the Perlembagan. Article 152, national language. The national language shall be the Malay language and shall be in such script as Parliament may by law provide. Article 152, Clause 1B. Clause B says, nothing in this clause shall prejudice the right of the federal government or of any state government to preserve and sustain the use and study of the language of any other community in the federation. So the federal and the state government have a right to preserve other languages. And that's why actually the National Language Act and the National Education Act allow vernacular schools to exist. People have gone to the court and say, how can you have vernacular school when Bhasa Malayu is the language of the federation? Actually, the federal and state governments have the right to protect, and they have done so. So I think this is a very generous and multicultural provision. Malay reserves. Article 89 says Malay reserves shall be protected. But along with Article 89, Clause 1, it also says, no non-Malay land shall be appropriated for Malay reserves. And if any land is reserved for Malay reservation, an equivalent amount of land shall be opened up for non-Malays. And also Malay reserves don't apply in Sabah Sarawak. So the Constitution actually constantly tried to walk the middle path of give and take. Malay reserve land is there, but no non-Malay land shall be taken over for purposes of Malay reserves. Now, next one is the most controversial one. Next slide, 153. Special position of the Malays and the natives of Sabah Sarawak has a number of limitations. Number one, along with the duty to protect the Malays, the natives of Sabah Sarawak, the Perlembagan also says the king is enjoined to safeguard the legitimate interests of other communities. Let me read to you, in case you don't believe me. Article 153, Clause 1. It shall be the responsibility of the Yang di Pertuan Agong to safeguard the special position of the Malays and natives of any of the states of Sabah and Sarawak, and the legitimate interest of other communities in accordance with the provisions of this article. So Article 153 actually does bear in mind the legitimate interests of other communities. Also, Article 153 applies in only 4 prescribed areas, not across the board. So I go to buy something in a shop, and you go to buy something in a shop, is the same price, even though I'm a non-Malay and you are a Malay. But in 4 areas, yes, there is special provision. What are these? Licenses and permits by the federal and state governments, civil service positions, post-secondary education, so university education, scholarships and educational facilities. I want to say this to you, though I know some of you may not like it. Often houses are sold by developers, 10% discount for Bhumiputras. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Constitution. 4 areas: licenses and permits, civil service positions, post-secondary education, scholarships. So 10% discount, that's not in the Constitution. But no one has challenged, but someday someone will challenge. Okay, in those sectors where the Agong can make reservations, let's say in the civil service, you know what's the law? The law says the Yang di Pertuan Agong may reserve such proportions. You please tell me, what's a proportion? Proportion cannot mean 100%. Such proportions as he may deem reasonable. So the words in the Article 153 are reserve, proportions, reasonable. The use of the word proportion implies that monopoly or exclusivity was not contemplated by the Perlembagaan Persekutuan. Next slide, please. The proportion is not prescribed, and the government may fix it as may be necessary. There is also the element of necessary. So reasonable and necessary. So if in a particular area it's no more necessary, the government can reduce the quota. In the operation of Article 153, the Perlembagaan says no non-Malay or heir should be deprived of what he already has. No business or profession can be exclusively assigned to any race. And now something else, very, 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 very secret. It's there, tapi it's a secret. Secret means no one knows about it. 136, Article 136. It says, in the public service, there shall be no discrimination on grounds of race. All persons of whatever race in the same grade in the service of the Federation shall, subject to the terms and conditions of their employment, be treated impartially. I'm not joking, it's there. It's there. All persons shall be treated impartially. But how do we balance 136 with 153? 153 says proportions, reservations are allowed. 136 says no discrimination. I don't have to give you an answer. Tun Sufyan, our former Lord President, gave the answer. He said, at entry point, quotas, reservations are allowed, provided they are reasonable and necessary. But once you and I are in the service, we should be treated equally. That's what 136 and 153 say. I'm trying to point out to you that the Perlembagaan was actually a masterpiece of compromises. It took note of all sides. Okay, that's all for the Perlembagaan. I just want to go on to the next slide. Unity does not mean uniformity. In many countries, including some of our neighboring countries, you can't have your indigenous names You have to have national names. Thailand is one of them. But here actually people maintain their community names. Then secularism and religion live side by side. Mosques and temples and churches dot the landscape. Despite the prohibitions for Muslims, non-Muslims are not forbidden from taking alcohol, have gambling permits, rear pigs, political parties, business and cultural associations. Sorry, next slide. Political parties, business and cultural associations are allowed to be organized on ethnic or religious lines. Whether this is good or bad is another matter. What I want to point out is there is no ban on saying Christian association to be registered or a Dayak association to be registered. Political parties, business, cultural associations are allowed to be organized on ethnic or religious lines. So much so that later Malaysia began its journey in 1957, looking like a canvas with many colors that mingle but remain distinct. Now, should associations and organizations on religious, racial, tribal grounds be allowed? Some people say they should not be allowed. Political parties must all be national, should not be on ground of race or religion. It's up to you. In my personal view, no country, including communist countries, can wipe out, can make people forget their race, religion, tribe, community, language. It's a task that many nations have attempted and have failed. When Poland was under communism, at one time, the Pope came from Poland. So from the Vatican, he went to visit his motherland. Millions of people came out in the streets to see the Pope. When the Communist Party leaders used to come out, they had to manufacture a crowd. But when the Pope came, spontaneously the Christians came, because though they were communist under the governance, the Christianity was in their heart and they came out. So I personally think we can't prevent people from having associations, organizations on religious, racial, language grounds. But of course, there should be other safeguards, not to insult, not to indulge in hate speech. Okay, may I go to the next slide, please? Some success has indeed been achieved to discover that which unites us and to tolerate that which divides us. I'm happy to report to you, though I know we have regressed. Some time ago, we scored fairly well on the World Peace Index, being ranked 19 out of 153 states. I'm not exaggerating to you. Just 3 or 4 years ago, an embassy officer from the USA, US Embassy, asked me, he said, how come in Malaysia people don't kill each other? He asked me, how come in Malaysia people don't kill each other? In India, they kill each other. In Myanmar, they kill each other. In Pakistan, they kill each other. In Sri Lanka, 200,000 people died. They kill each other on racial grounds, on religious grounds. In Malaysia, we may not love each other, but we don't kill each other. So I told him, I said, well, as far as I can see, it's because there is place for everyone under the Malaysian sun. We all have opportunities for upward mobility. That's why should we make the country burn? Because actually we have so much to gain from it. Okay, so then I'll try to be brief. Prof, can I have another 10 minutes?
No one's going anywhere, right?
No.
So 5:45, but we can separate it and then give an individual break.
I'll just take 10 more minutes. Huh?
Okay, sure.
Sure. With Q&A.
Then Q&A.
Makan.
I will take the question. I may not be able to answer it. Okay, politics of accommodation. For the first 2 years before Merdeka, 55 to 57, then 57 till 2018, we were actually resorting to politics of accommodation. We had a multi-racial, multi-religious government. I know for about 2 years, -2, it was a predominantly Malay government, but now again, it's a multiracial government. So I think this country is built on an overwhelming spirit of accommodation between the races, a moderateness of spirit, and an absence of the kind of passions and zeal which in other societies has left a heritage of bitterness. So we have done well. I don't want to. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to butter you up, but actually, many people outside the country do tell me. They say, despite all your problems, in many respects, Malaysia is far better than even some European countries. For example, in terms of law and order, in terms of control on terrorism, we are doing much better than many other countries. We have lots of flaws, but I think we should also count our blessings. So there is politics of accommodation. We had Richard Malanjan as the Chief Justice a few years ago, using the economy to unite the people. I want to say this to you. The president of Bosnia said this to us. He says, you have used the economy to unite the people, in the sense that everybody had an opportunity to rise up, and therefore actually they had some attachment to the country. And he said, this is something that other nations must emulate. However, there are dark clouds over the horizon. Next slide, please. Dark clouds. Next one. Sadly, we have suffered a regression since the 90s, and especially before GE14, GE15, and PR6N. Racial and religious polarization have reached alarming levels. An endless list of controversies continue to disturb the calm. Ethnic and religious ideology, racial politics are causing a hardening of cultural boundaries. In some respects, we have become a nation of strangers. Besides, next slide, besides interreligious and interracial disharmony, we are lately witnessing a fairly high degree of intra-racial and intra-religious discord. Muslims are busy condemning other Muslims as kafirs, as liberals, as pluralists, as all sorts of other derogatory names. Instead of uniting, instead of actually being part of the same ummah, we are indulging actually in condemning each other. The voices of hate against pluralist, deviationist, liberals, Shias, those who are traitors to their race and religion, have reached very high proportions. And the other problem is this, that in this country, very uniquely, race and religion are combined together. No other country has that. No other country combines race and religion. But in this country, there is this unique aspect that race and religion are combined, in the sense that to be a Malay, you must be a Muslim. Actually, the Filipinas are Malays. Rose Hizal was a Malay, isn't she? But because they are not Muslim, they would not be. However, I just want to mention this to you. I know this is a sensitive issue, but I'm confident you look at it in an intellectual way. The definition of a Malay has 4 characteristics. Would you believe that the definition of a Malay has no requirement of the Malay race? Would you believe that? You must be a Muslim. You must follow Malay Adat. You must speak Bahasa Melayu habitually. Number 4, either you must be born in Malaya or Singapore, before Merdeka Day, or you're descended from one parent who was so born in Malaya or Singapore. There's no requirement that you must be of Malay stock. So actually people of non-Malay stock are eligible to be Malays provided they satisfy the 4 requirements. And I want to say this to you, almost all Malays, almost all of us have some mixed origin. Oh, we are in denial. My wife is a Malay and she's a Malay for many generations, but one of her grandparents was Chinese. My children are mixed, and as the occasion requires, they are Malay or they are Pakistanis or they are Indian Muslim. I want to tell you this, it's not a joke. I have 5 children and somehow my wife managed to produce 2 Malays, 2 Pakistanis and 1 Indian Muslim. How did she do that? I don't know. I don't know how she did that. Basically, what happened was this.
Father, 2 following the father. 2 following the father, 2 following the mother.
Well, actually, it worked like that, Dato. All the children were born at Asunta Hospital because I believed in Dato Menon, the gynecologist. So all my children were born at Asunta. So no need to go here and there to register down. Just 2 steps down, 2 stories down, there is a registration counter. So for the first child, my father-in-law went to register. Memanglah Melayu. Father-in-law. I went to register. He looks at me like that. And the child is registered as an Indian Muslim. And then, so it worked like that. Depends on who went to register. So my wife has produced people of 3 different racial stock.
So be careful who goes there.
Yeah, when you go to may I please go to for this slide, government's role to restore. Yeah, that's the one. I think the government must recognize diversity as an asset. There are some leaders who are going around talking rubbish, talking nonsense to say this is a Malay country, the rest are all Pendatang. They must look in the mirror actually. They must look in the mirror and see who is a Pendatang and who is not a Pendatang. I think diversity should be recognized as an asset. I want to say this to you very honestly. To me, one of the signs of a great civilization is that it learns to live peacefully and in harmony with others. And I want to say this to you, Malay civilization was like that. And I hope it can return to that quality of its civilization. Malays were a very inclusive people. But now I know there is some leadership that is trying to put the clock back. Okay, then we must improve constitutional literacy, especially of the ethnic provisions. If this literacy is improved, I think we will see that the Constitution was a document of great tolerance. May I please move on to just skip a few slides. Number 3, provide a new statutory institutional framework for reconciling race and religious conflicts. I think we need a National Harmony Act or a Race and Religious Relations Act. I am fully aware we have a Sedition Act. We have a penal code. We have a Multimedia Act. We have many other laws. The government is armed with many bazookas, very powerful laws. But I personally believe that in racial, religious matters, part of the problem is lack of knowledge. Most prejudices are born out of ignorance. If this ignorance could be combated, so I humbly recommend there should be a National Harmony Act, the purpose of which should not be to put people in jail. The purpose should be to call them and say, you said this, why do you say this? And have a discussion to reconcile people, bring them together. That should be the first attempt. It won't be done in 1 hour or 2 hours. It won't be done in the first meeting. There should be a requirement that you must attend a short course. So I believe that that may be a way of solving problem. The next National Unity Council should be upgraded to a statutory status. I know this council exists, but they probably have the ability to remain, I don't know, what's the word for it? Invisible. They are quite invisible. I don't know where they are. What are they doing? The National Unity Council. Maybe they do a good work, but I don't know. I think they must be a little bit more active, especially when hate speech occurs on grounds of religion or race. I think the National Unity Council must speak up and say, this is not right. I'm not saying Attorney General should not prosecute, that's a separate matter. What I'm saying is there should be an attempt also to speak up and to contradict this hate speech. Because I believe that each of us has a role to play in making this into a better country. I believe that all of us can play the role of a small pebble which is cast on the placid surface of a lake, but the ripples go very far. I want to say this to you. It's not the law necessarily that will make us free of these prejudices. It is we that will make the law free of all these things. So I think we need to play a role. We must promote interfaith studies. Next slide. Interfaith studies. There is this belief in this country, oh, no. You cannot expose Muslims to other religions because they will get confused. I think the people who say this are the ones who are confused. I went to the USA to study. In my university, it was mandatory that whether you are a medical student or law student, you must study humanities. In the first semester, the following books were prescribed: the Holy Bible, King James Version, the Holy Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, Plato's Republic, Homer's Iliad. These 5 books were prescribed. We had to read. I was basically a freshman in college. I didn't get confused. Instead, I learned about other religions. It made me see some differences. It made me see a lot of commonalities. I read in my Holy Quran that actually there's a whole chapter on Virgin Mary in the Holy Quran. I didn't know that before. I went to Wesleyan in the United States. There's a whole chapter about the birth of Jesus Christ in the Holy Quran. So I think we need interfaith studies. Next one, educational system must be revamped. I believe that over the years, there has become too much emphasis on religion. I'm not against religion, please. I have said that earlier. Religion cannot be forgotten, but there must be some sense of balance. I think there is too much. Mahathir Mohamad himself said this. He said our primary, secondary schools have basically become religious schools. That's why many Muslims are not sending their kids to primary school. 20% of vernacular schools, especially Chinese vernacular schools, are actually being patronized by non-Chinese. And my family was one of them. The role of the rulers. Next slide. Their Majesties, the Malay rulers, I think should play a role in trying to protect the interest of all communities. These rulers are the rulers of everyone. They're also the head of Islam, and I think they should play a role. There should be a declaration of religious and racial harmony, like we had Rukun Nagara in 1971. We should have a declaration on religious and racial harmony. Hate speech, sorry, next slide. Hate speech polarizes communities, and I think it should be subjected to severe punishment by the law. We need to learn from others. Next slide. in many societies, including Singapore, UK, USA, the law is being used to socially engineer a more tolerant society. I was in Singapore for a seminar and I was reading the paper. Evidently, what happened was this. One Da'wah fellow from India came to Singapore and he was giving a talk in a masjid. And he said that there is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad which says you cannot associate with non-Muslims. He said something of that sort. You know what Singapore did? They called him and said, show us the hadith. There was no such hadith. So they told him, now you go back to your mosque and you confess that you were wrong. So he had to go back. It was all required by the law in Singapore. When you say hateful things like that, you have to eat your words. You have to confess that you were actually indulging in hate speech. They made him go back. And then, of course, after he had said all that, then they asked him to leave Singapore, which is what I think was good. Many religious people actually basically misuse religion to promote hate. And what they say is a lie. Actually, it's a lie. Many of them actually are not experts in religion. They have very, very basic pondo knowledge of religion. But because of the outward appearance, they often pretend that they are the best and others are no good. We need to learn from others. The special rights of Sabah Sarawak need to be respected. I want to say this to you. No time today. We can talk about it some other time. Sabah Sarawak were given lots of special rights. Many of them have been violated. For example, tourism was taken away. But tourism is a source of lots of wealth. Orang Asli, Article 8 specifically mentions that Orang Asli special position can be safeguarded, but they are the forgotten community. Then the electoral system is such that actually the system is not that defective, it's the operation. They have too many constituencies which have predominantly dominant Malay majority. I think we should have more multi-racial, multi-religious constituencies. If I'm a candidate and the constituency is multiracial, then my words and my speeches will have to take note of that fact. Right now, because constituencies are too much of one community, people don't bother about taking care of the interest of other communities. Then the role of ordinary citizens. Next slide, please. We must recognize that our cultures are intermingled and interdependent. Our cultures are intermingled, without doubt. As fellow citizens, we must build bridges, not walls. We must distinguish racism from race consciousness. I believe it's all right to be race conscious. So you want to promote your community, why not? In fact, you may want to promote another community. You may want to work for the Orang Asli, why not? But racism is when you want to put others down. So when you say, oh, their schools must not be recognized, that's racism. To me, that's racism. But if you say, my community is backward in education, it should be given some help. That is all right, in my view. Next slide. Constitutional literacy should be promoted. We must acknowledge and develop multiple identities. This is a point I'm borrowing from Professor Dr. Dennison. We all have multiple identities in the sense that I'm a law teacher, but along with that, I'm also a father, I'm also a husband, I'm also a neighbor, I'm also a member of a community, I'm also a member of a club. I think we have multiple identities. I think we must promote multiple identities. The idea that I'm this first and this last, I don't think that is true. When I'm driving a car, I'm a driver first. I'm a driver first at that particular moment. In my classroom, I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. Above all, I'm a teacher. But of course, the roles. We all play many roles. We must recognize human rights for all, not only for ourselves. The first function of freedom should be to free someone else. We all know about our rights. I think we should worry about the rights of others. I ask my students in the class, I say, if your child were taken away and converted by one parent, what would you say? If you were living in Philippines, and your child was taken away by the Filipino father and converted to another religion, how would you feel? Then they keep quiet. I think do unto others as you wish to be done unto you. I know this is in the Bible. Okay. We must welcome social engagement. While venerating our religion, we must never condemn other faiths. We must not stereotype any race or religion. There are good people in all religions. In all races, there are good people. We must not stereotype. We must be the change we wish to see in the world. And I just want to end by quoting former Secretary General Kofi Annan. As we walk through the meadows of our mind, let us confront ignorance with knowledge, bigotry with tolerance, and isolation with the outstretched hands of generosity. Thank you very much. May God be with you all.